What's up, guys? How are you all doing? The name of today's story is The Celestial Demon Wants to Live a Peaceful Life. But let me just say this up front. This bastard does not want to live a peaceful life at all. No way. This guy won't forgive a single enemy or even a single friend. Remember that boy who built his own army? Ronan? Well, this one is kind of like Ronan, but a bit more bold and unhinged. So without further delay, let's dive in. Under the moonlight, a group of troops charges toward the celestial demon who is floating in the sky. He asks if blood and fear are really all they desire. The army attacks, and with a twisted smile, he says if that's what they want, then so be it. Everyone's bodies start exploding. The sky turns red. Blood rains down. He declares, they are all too weak. While the few survivors hesitate to even draw their swords, he charges another attack. Just then, the army finally retaliates. They all rush at him. But one of the demon's techniques activates. He says, today you will learn the power of demonic arts. The ground begins to shake, and a giant hand rises from the earth. It heads straight for the army, which immediately begins to flee. But they're all crushed, dragged away, wiped out. Those dying ask themselves how this could be real. How could so many people fail to defeat just one man? Then, the hand closes in the sky. Once again, it rains blood. The demon smiles and asks where the next challengers are. But the battlefield, now covered in corpses, is silent. Suddenly, he feels something. He clutches his chest and starts coughing up blood. A dark mist begins creeping toward him. This is the price for using his demonic art to that extent. He was paying the cost of absolute power. After consuming countless souls, he had believed he would one day overcome this curse, a curse that no one had ever broken. But it seemed his arrogance had spoken louder. From within the darkness, many purple eyes appear and stare at him. Looking down, chains emerge from the ground and shoot toward him. He finds himself hovering over a void, and the chains wrap around his legs, arms, and neck. He asks if someone is trying to drag him to hell. He screams, the force of it shatters the curse. He says he won't be forced into anything. But then, a light shines in front of him, and his body starts to dissolve. At that moment, he realizes that the demonic art he had used his entire life, the one that was supposed to be inescapable, was now consuming him. If he ever had another chance at life, he would choose a different path. He says he wants a quiet, peaceful life. But guys, as I've already said, I've read up to chapter 5, he definitely does not want a peaceful life. The story shifts to a traditional Japanese-style setting. The boy stands in front of a lake when the servant Sasho appears, telling him to eat before the food gets cold. He raises his hand and swings it at her like he wants to slice her head off with power. That's Batburu, our reincarnated celestial demon. Obviously, the girl is alive, because he no longer has any powers. That was just a test. If he had power, he would have killed her on the spot. She looks at him with a strange expression and says he's been acting weird lately. She sends him to his room while he stares at his own hand in confusion. He mutters that he probably couldn't even cut a neck now. He had been reincarnated into a garbage body like this. Looking into the water, he says he hates the reflection of a face that looks like a girl's. Later at lunch, he struggles to hold his spoon. He keeps telling himself that this body is worse than garbage. Soso tells him to calm down. Soon he'll start getting better. She says she's heard about a very skilled doctor who's coming this time. But he asks what a doctor he doesn't even know the name of could possibly do. She urges him to be a bit more positive. Things will start getting better soon. But it's been 10 days since he reincarnated into this stinking body. He's now the second son of the greatest merchant in the city of Wuhan. He stands up all skinny and frail, and as soon as he touches his face, a bunch of people rush over to help him, bringing water, putting clothes on him. His body is so useless that he literally can't even eat on his own. And to make things worse, the demon hates how pretty his face is. Talk about a first world problem. He finds it ironic that someone who once stood at the top of the world is now struggling just to survive. For now, he's using all the energy he has just to keep breathing. He knows the fastest way to recover would be to steal people's soul energy. If he were the demon he used to be, it would be easy, just kill and steal. But the problem is he's way too weak now. He sits, reflecting that he could die at any moment. But no way is he letting that happen. He was given a rare second chance. That's because just before he died, he had a realization about the demonic arts. Now that he understands the wrong path, he can use that knowledge to pursue something completely different. He calls for Soso and tells her he wants to go out today. She asks where he wants to go and offers to take him anywhere. The rascal says he wants to visit the House of Curtis, popularly known as, and the scene cuts, massage or brothel. Soso was about to say it was good to know, but her expression suddenly changed. She asked if she had really just heard what she thought. He found her reaction strange and wanted to know why she looked so confused. She only responded that if that was the case, it would be better if he took the guard chum with him instead of her. She added that she had never seen him act like this before. He said that if that's the case, she could come with him, but obviously she refused, and he walked off on his own. A little later, she was putting a cloak on him, thinking about how strangely he had been acting over the past few days. And now, out of nowhere, he said he wanted to visit a brothel. Taeyeon asked where the bodyguard was, and she replied not to worry, that he's the one who always trains to protect the young master. Then she asked him not to be too hard on himself. He asked why. She said she felt like he had given up on everything lately, that he should at least try to cheer up a little since the doctor was already in the house. Tyson thought to himself that now, with his power reduced to that of a normal person, he was finally starting to understand a little more how people felt. He could tell that she really did care about him, and honestly, that wasn't such a bad thing. Suddenly, he looked at the gate and said the guy had arrived. A person outside sneezed, and Soso asked how he knew that. He replied that, with an aura like that, of course he would notice. The gate opened, and Tyne stared down the man. Chum Ki-gan introduced himself, saying it had been a while since the young master had summoned him. The protagonist stared at him, thinking this guy was like the embodiment of a blade. His energy was so refined that it was hard to believe he was just working as a bodyguard. Maybe his father's merchant group wasn't as simple as he thought. A while later, they arrived at the greatest battlefield of all, the House of Fragrant Roses. They got off their horse, and at the entrance, Ki-gan said he would wait there. The protagonist wanted to know why. If they had come all the way here together, why would he just stand outside? Ki-gan tried to explain, but Taeyeon cut him off, asking if he was really confident he could protect him before anything happened. Poor guy didn't even get a chance to respond. Taeyeon had already walked off, telling him to follow and come have some fun. Ki-gan responded that he couldn't. Taeyeon asked, "Couldn't what? Have fun? Or obey his orders?" Caught in the stare, Ki-gan started trembling. At that moment, Taeyeon approached and said that it would be great if Ki-gan could enjoy himself and protect the young master, but if he didn't want to enjoy the place, he should at least stay close by. The young man lowered his head and said he understood. With that, our boy opened the door and was immediately greeted by all the workers. His expression made it clear he came to cause trouble. There were girls playing music, and shortly after, they were all sitting around a table chatting. Taeyeon asked where the bodyguard was, and one of the girls said he was just outside guarding the young master. She noted that he seemed like one of those serious types, not easy to convince otherwise. One of the girls came to serve him some alcohol, but he said his body wasn't feeling too good, so he'd allow only them to drink tonight. The girls were confused and asked what he had come for. Then, he said first he wanted to hear all the rumors being spread about him. They were still puzzled, so he clarified he wanted to know what people say when they talk about the second son of the head merchant in the city. He said he'd ask each of them and wanted honest answers. Later, he found out that most people believed he'd inherit 1,000 gold coins, a small mansion, and a few brothel houses. But compared to his father's wealth, this was nothing. Apparently, the important part of the inheritance was going to the other son named Tasu. Tanya realized the difference was no small thing. For him, coming here had already been worthwhile. These were the kinds of things no one in the house would dare say to his face. Suddenly, he stood up and said, "Enough talk, it was time to begin." Unfortunately, handling all of them at once would be difficult. So tonight he would choose only one. He gave a long look and the girl immediately knew she had been chosen. In the next scene, he was already in bed. She approached him. Outside the room, the other girls were gossiping, wondering if he would come back another day, and why he had chosen wrong. She sat next to him and he asked how long she had been working there. She replied, 10 years. Wow, this one was experienced. Talent definitely wasn't lacking. He smiled back and said that if that was the case, they could begin. Meanwhile, the girls downstairs whispered that they'd ask Rong for all the juicy details later. Kim Jong was just standing there, listening to all this chatter, when suddenly, a loud moan echoed through the entire place. The loyal servant of our boy. The other men enjoying themselves, the guards, everyone in the whole house heard the shouting. One of them scratched his cheek and commented, "Those are some impressive sounds." One of the women mentioned that apparently the sound isolating barrier in that room wasn't working, because clearly things were getting very loud in there. The sheets were moving, but in reality he was using a technique, extracting something from the woman's mind. Sometime later he opened the door of the room. Kim Won asked if he was okay. He smiled and said he was feeling better than ever. He began descending the stairs while the girls giggled in the background. After a while they called for Rong and asked her what had happened. Not only was she 100% alive, they were all saying she looked even more beautiful. Her skin and hair were glowing and her eyelashes looked longer. They were confused. How could that happen? Had the guy given her some kind of elixir? She replied, not exactly. She couldn't remember what happened, but her body felt incredibly light as if she had been reborn. What could that sneaky guy have done to make her feel like that? Meanwhile, back at his house, Sarva was sweeping and wondering if the boy had passed out with the courtesans. Suddenly, the gate opened. When she saw her boy walking in, 100% alive, she rushed up and asked if he had really gone to see a courtesan, and whether he came out in one piece. He didn't respond, he simply told her to ask King Guan. The man was clearly embarrassed, looking like someone who didn't want to explain much, but she already noticed the boy looked just fine. Later, in his room, he was concentrating the energy he had absorbed from Rong. Even with all the power he had taken, he had only managed to restore a small part of his body. The truth is, what he took from her wasn't like vital energy or anything like that. In his past life, whenever he absorbed energy, he would end up killing people, but that had its consequences. Instead of harvesting negative death energy, he was now purifying people's thoughts, souls, and bodies. He was absorbing pure energy. That was the realization he had come to at the end of his previous life, when he began to fade away and finally understood why everything had gone wrong. That's exactly why he had gone to the house of those women. They had probably been through many hardships in life, which meant they had a lot of impurities to purify. But his biggest problem was still his filthy, broken body. It seemed like he would need to visit that house quite a few more times. 10 days passed. The girls were now running desperately through the corridors, saying they couldn't believe how often he was showing up, especially with such a weak body. They were all excited to get a chance with the boy, since after being purified they noticed improvements in their appearance. Not to mention he was the son of a rich family. If he started liking one of them, there was a real chance their lives could change. As he walked through the corridors, they were all staring, trying to seduce him. He was complimenting some of them while another girl was sulking in the corner. The owner of the house was furious that this brat kept showing up every single day. A voice from the shadows asked if they should strengthen the sound isolation system. She replied that she had already tried every method, but it was useless. Every time this bastard came in, a screaming match started in that room. Even the other customers were starting to complain. But then she asked, "Don't you find it strange that someone who is on the verge of death suddenly started acting like this? And why does he keep coming specifically to this brothel when his family runs others of their own?" The shadow asked if they should investigate what these people were really planning. But she replied that, for now, it was better not to. They were the most powerful merchant group in the city, after all. First, she needed to figure out what exactly was happening inside those rooms. Back inside the brothel, our boy was walking down the hall, still being chased by the girls. Just seeing him made them all smile like fools. Looking around, he muttered to himself that today, he wanted a more difficult challenge. He wondered where she was. He turned to one of the attendants and ordered him to bring out all the girls who were working. The man looked confused. He said that the most beautiful and popular ones were already right there. Those who weren't present just weren't that attractive. But the brat had already noticed one in the back. He walked among the girls and declared that he would decide who was worth noticing. The girls were clearly bitter when they saw him walking toward the ugliest one of them. He asked for her name. With a dark tone, she replied, "Dan Jung." He smiled and said it was a pleasure to meet her, and that tonight he would be needing her services. The girls nearby whispered that he had a very unique taste. He continued walking the halls, noticing that Dan Young had a deeply depressive aura, which probably meant she carried a lot of emotional burden. Exactly the kind of person he needed. Now that he was regaining part of his health, it was time for a slightly tougher challenge. He kicked the door open, then paused for a second. He smiled and said, "Take a look at these bastards." He called for King Wan and asked for his sword. As soon as it was handed to him, he threw it upwards, and it struck the ceiling of the bed. Blood dripped from the blade. They realized there had been an assassin hiding above. The protagonist, however, just muttered that the guy was still alive, which left him furious with himself. After all, he had almost gotten the assassin, but not quite. Caught off guard and still walking out alive, that alone was impressive. But seeing the blood dripping in the room, Dan Jun was not happy about it. Our boy just told them to take care of it because he had business to attend to with the girl. He called for Danong and told her to get ready because tonight he was going to suck her soul out of her body. You rascal. You're only saying that because you mean it literally. If it were in the other sense, I doubt you'd say it so confidently. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, a girl was talking after hearing a rumor that the second young master of the house had been visiting the courtesans every night. The girl sitting down asked what people had been calling him lately. This was the mansion's guard named Yosu Yon, and she replied that he was now known as the king of the house of perfumed roses, or even the man of unmatched patency. The girl standing up slammed her hand on the table and demanded to be taken to that house immediately. She had to meet him. Her name was Ayan Hiran, and she was our boy's fiancée. That's right, he'd been visiting the courtesan house 10 days in a row and he had a fiancée. Yeah, he's that bold. Hiran said she was going to confront him right now. Meanwhile, someone arrived to speak with our protagonist, telling him he needed to return home. But the protagonist wanted to know what happened to the assassin. The person looked nervous and said he had locked the man up in prison. Tae-ran, our protagonist, responded that he had done a good job and that it was time to head back. However, the servant was silently wondering to himself, is this really the same master I once knew? Not only had his energy changed, but he now had the skill to take down an assassin like that. It was almost as if he were a completely different person. Later, he returned home feeling a bit more upbeat. His body was finally starting to recover. Of course, he was still far from what he once was, but he was no longer someone who could be called trash. Being happy over such a small improvement made him realize how much he had changed. That's when he suddenly stopped and asked himself, "Who are these two in front of me? And why is the one on the left staring at me like that?" One of them stepped forward and asked if it was true that he'd been spending every night at the courtesan house. The protagonist, however, had no idea who this crazy girl was. Then Haran asked if he was unhappy about their engagement, and if this was his way of trying to push her away. Surprise, turns out the guy just found out he was engaged. She added that, even if he was trying to get rid of her on purpose, she would never give up on him, and moved in close to him. She only asked that he wouldn't give up on her either. Of course, our boy was completely confused. He still had no idea who this lunatic was. But being honest yet in a different tone, he responded that he wasn't doing this with any such intentions. When he said he wouldn't give up on her, a smile crept across her face. All emotional, she said her feelings were finally being understood. But before he could say anything else, she was already turning away, saying she was leaving. She walked off all flustered, calling out to him while he just stood there thinking, this girl just healed me for a second. So far, she's been the strongest enemy I've ever faced. Then he noticed his servant already walking ahead and he was blushing too. Uh-oh, what's going on here? Later, Seo was giving our boy a bath with his clothes still on, asking if he ran into Lady Heron on the way back. He wanted to know how she already knew that, and she replied that she had eyes and ears all over the place. But he was already convinced that it was this woman's fault that those two found out he'd been going to the courtesan house every day. Then Seo suddenly asked if Kingwon was okay, which confused him. Why would anything be wrong with that guy? She explained Kingwon was in love with Harin's maid. Well, this makes things easier to follow. The protagonist has a servant and a fiancé, and his servant is in love with his fiancé's servant. Everything's matching up nicely. One, two, or in this case, maybe too much more complicated. Now it made sense why King Wen was already walking ahead the moment they passed Haran. It was strange. These were relationships based on respect, not fear. Back in his previous life, people only respected you if they feared you. Still, he wasn't hating it, and that made him wonder. Was his soul being influenced by the body he now lived in? Later on, inside the prison, King Wan reported that he had paralyzed the assassin using pressure points. Tyran thanked him and ordered the cell to be opened. As he entered, he looked at the man and smiled. His body was full of dark, evil energy, which was exactly what you'd expect from an assassin. But for our protagonist, who loved absorbing dark energy, this was like a gourmet meal. He told King Wan to stay outside. The servant hesitated, saying it would be dangerous, and asked what exactly he planned to do alone. Tyran, humble as ever, simply asked, "What would you even do to help, anyway?" You didn't even notice this assassin hiding on the bed last time. The servant looked a bit embarrassed and left. Trying to explain himself, but Tyson simply said, "I'm not going to repeat myself." Our boy sounded cold as ice, and the servant quickly responded that he understood. He closed the cell and stepped outside again. Once more, he couldn't believe that the same young master he'd always known was now exuding such an overwhelming aura. For a moment, it felt like he was standing in front of a martial arts master. Suddenly, shouting erupted from inside the cell. He drew his sword but quickly noticed that the voice wasn't the young master's. That meant it was the bandit yelling. What he really wanted to know, though, was what the young master was doing in there. Turns out, Tyson was obviously extracting the man's soul energy. And from how dark and evil the energy was, he immediately realized this guy was even more dangerous than he had imagined. But then he noticed the soul was too corrupted. It forced him to cancel the transfer and left him wondering if it had gone beyond what he could handle. To perform a perfect purification, the process has to continue until only pure energy remains. But in this guy's case, the soul was so twisted it would have started corrupting Tyen's own soul. So he had no choice but to retreat. This one was clearly too dangerous for him to absorb. For now, he'd have to handle things with the courtesans first. Meanwhile, back at the House of Perfumed Flowers, the madam was stressed out, biting her nails, trying to figure out what was going on. It had already been 2 days since her shadow assassin was captured by Tyen, and the guy still hadn't shown up. Her servant didn't really know what to say, but suddenly someone burst through the door and called for the madam, saying she needed to come immediately. Just then, the shadow assassin walked in. But the guy looked strange. The madam asked why he was twitching and contorting like that. She quickly ordered them to hit his pressure points to release whatever was affecting him. The guy obeyed and struck a point at the base of the assassin's neck, but then his body began to dissolve. And before they could even understand what was happening, he collapsed into a puddle of jelly, leaving behind nothing but his skeleton. In that moment, the madam was certain this was the work of the merchant group, a group tied to Tainli's family. She then asked where Danong was. The man replied that they were planning to send her to the master of the Crimson Dragon clan. But the madam declared that plan was cancelled. They were going to send Danong to Master Tyne instead. The servant hesitated, saying that was madness. If a man as vicious as the Crimson Dragon Master found out, he'd start destroying everything in retaliation. Even so, the madam just told him to obey. She was canceling Danong's visits to the House of Perfumed Flowers and would send her as a gift to young Tyne. Some time passed, and a strange rumor started to spread throughout the brothel. The girls were saying that if you spent a night with that man, you would wake up more beautiful than ever, almost like you'd been reborn. Not only that, it seemed like you'd become addicted. You'd only want to stay near him. Some even started calling him a divine being who had crossed the threads of time. These rumors spread like wildfire. At first, the madam thought it was just some exaggerated talk among the working girls. But now there was Danong standing right in front of her, saying she wanted to serve the boy. The madam laughed and asked why, out of nowhere, she wanted to give up everything to be with Tan. Apparently, Danong had fallen for him, but that would only be possible if he paid off all her debts. Danong replied that he hadn't said anything like that. It was just her own desire. Suddenly, the madam's expression changed. She said she didn't know what kind of conversations Danyang and Tyen had, But Danong was nothing more than a possession of that place. She would stay there until every last debt was paid. She was ordered to obey and prepare to visit the master of the Crimson Dragon clan. Now I'm confused. She went through all that, yet the very next moment she's standing in front of our boy's house. Looks like that scene happened before her talk with the madam. So that's when she made the decision to change plans. Now Danjong is there, clearly sent by the madam after changing her mind. But Danong herself is full of doubts, afraid that the boy won't accept her, worried he'll think she's too dirty. Still, despite all the risks, she wanted to see him again. Oh, sweetheart, the guy's been going to the brothel every day for 30 days straight. If there's one thing he doesn't care about, it's that he was in his room, as usual, training to strengthen his body, when someone appeared and said the young master had a visitor. Obviously, it was Danong. He was a bit confused about why she was there, but she placed her hand on her chest, bowed, and offered her greetings to Master Tian. She said she wanted to serve him for the rest of her life, and apologized for showing up so suddenly. All she wanted was to stay by his side. Only then did our boy seem to realize something. Whenever he purifies someone's soul, their appearance improves. So the first thing he did was turn to Soso and ask where she sleeps. She replied that she had a servant's house nearby, but he told her to find a different place, because from now on she and Danong were going to live together. Trying to stay close to him, poor Soso was scared. He hadn't even said he accepted Danong, and he was already giving orders. Before she could understand anything, he was already walking out, telling her to take care of the girl. But the little servant girl kept thinking to herself that woman was far too beautiful for a job like this. Once again, she wondered why he had changed so much recently. After spending one night with each girl from the House of Perfumed Roses, he was now visiting the House of Fallen Flowers. And since he was looking for the most broken and mentally messed up women, this name alone already seemed promising to him. He was eager to absorb the corrupt energy from that place. However, as he approached the location, someone suddenly ordered him to stop and look over. Tain turned and locked eyes with the Crimson Dragon clan leader, who came demanding to know if he was the one who had stolen Danong. The nearby merchants already knew whenever this guy appeared, it meant trouble. Our boy asked King Guan who this idiot was. King Guan explained that was the master of the Crimson Dragon sect, a rogue group that had settled in the area. Tain simply responded that rogue group was just a fancy way of calling them a gang of thugs. He said lowlives like that had no business using such a grand name. He literally told everyone to ignore those idiots and kept walking, unfazed. Of course, that didn't sit well with the other side. The Crimson Dragon Master asked if he was seriously being ignored and called Tan a little gigolo, telling him to stay right there. Tyvertaren didn't appreciate being called a gigolo, though honestly that nickname was pretty tame. He had heard worse for less. Still, the celestial demon muttered to himself that he already hated having such a pretty face with all his soul. And now that Freak had the nerve to call him a gigolo, the Crimson Master laughed loudly, saying the little boy looked scared. But Tian wasn't one for many words. He stepped forward and said he'd leave the rest to his servant. King Guan immediately understood and unsheathed his sword. Obviously, the other guy's servants responded too, but the Crimson Master mocked Tan, saying it was pathetic that he had to hire bodyguards to act tough. He claimed that today Tang would learn the meaning of real courage, and if he wanted to leave alive, all he had to do was hand over Danong. Taiza replied, "That's never going to happen. And you talk too much. Do you fight with your mouth too?" In a split second, the man lunged to attack, yelling that today was the day Tadlin would die. King Wan had just taken down 2 enemies and saw the man charging, but before he could do anything, the punch was already about to land on Taya. But our boy, in full celestial demon style, simply flicked his hand and landed a clean hit right on the man's chin. Unfortunately, something happened to his wrist. Even a simple attack like that was straining his body. Still, the Crimson Dragon Master dropped to the ground like a pile of garbage. Juan was worried, but all Tan wanted to know was if the other 2 had been killed. A bit embarrassed, the servant admitted, no, he'd only knocked them out. Taiyang said the guy was too weak anyway and ordered Guan to finish the 2 off and follow him. He paused for a moment and said, "If anyone asks who killed this guy, lie, don't say it was me." Poor King Guan was stiff as a board but just replied, "All right." Still, he was confused. How was the kid killing the Crimson Dragon leader with no weapons? Now it was clear what he did to that assassin wasn't luck. The problem was, this made it even more obvious that he wasn't the same person anymore. The next morning, he woke up. Naughty little guy had slept right next to Danong. I'm starting to think this whole soul extraction thing is just a cover. Our boy is clearly enjoying himself. I didn't see him extract any corruption from her. It looks like he did the corrupting. In that moment, he was angry at himself. He nearly broke his wrist just fighting that weakling yesterday. He knew he still had a lot to grow. But what really annoyed him was being called a gigolo like that. Then, he noticed the bodyguard of Irene was there. Seong looked over and said, "So, you finally showed up." As usual, our boy didn't waste time and asked what her business was. He was sure it wasn't for tea. But before answering, Song asked if the courtesan who served him was one of the girls working in the house he visited every day. He snapped back coldly, "What's the problem?" She saw that his robe was half open and asked if he had just returned from visiting his friends. Casually and without shame, he simply said yes. At that moment, she seemed to lose all hope. Then she told him his engagement would have to be cancelled. Obviously, our boy didn't seem too concerned about that. Still, she explained that someone had sent a marriage proposal for Harin, directly from the Zongjil clan and the Morin alliance. Wait a minute, Zongjil? Isn't that the guy from Gag? What the hell is he doing here now, trying to steal the waifu? Because of all this, our boy was causing Harin to be pressured into canceling the engagement, but she was completely against the idea. The problem was that rumors had started spreading, and Taegyeon understood it was hard for her to refuse the proposal, especially when everyone knew he was spending his nights at the brothels with a different friend each time, sometimes more than one. So, he asked if she was there to warn him about this Songgil guy since these people might have bad intentions. Sungon confirmed it. Harin had asked her to protect him. When she began explaining who these people were, he cut her off, calling them a bunch of disgusting bastards. Apparently, these guys were important, because Song told him not to say things like that so openly. But it turns out this Songgil clan had abandoned him back when he was the celestial demon. Meaning those bastards had been stirring up trouble in the world for a long time. He got up saying it was interesting that Swan came to defend him, but what really piqued his interest was seeing just what these guys were capable of. Sometime later, under the daylight, 3 of them walked through the forest. Our boy had a little smile on his face, his body was evolving more and more, but the girl walking alongside them kept staring at him with anger. He turned to her and said that if she didn't want to follow him, she didn't have to. But she lowered her head and replied that it wasn't like that, this was the least she could do for him. The protagonist responded with, "All right then," but thought to himself that anyone watching this situation would assume he actually wanted her there. Suddenly, he stopped walking. King Guan asked what was wrong, and Taiyan simply asked how many of them were nearby. Guan was confused, but after glancing behind and above, he saw it, a bunch of assassins hidden in the branches. Taiyan spotted 3 of them at first, then corrected himself. "No, there's another one hiding. That makes 4. The assassins dropped down and one of them said it wasn't worth hiding anymore since they'd been discovered. A white-haired guy stepped forward and told the 3 not to resist and just come with them. Taelian was already annoyed. Once again, some damn thugs were acting like honorable men. As always, he completely ignored what the guy said and instead spoke to Guan, asking him to estimate the difference in strength between himself and the white-haired one. Guan took a look. He could see energy emanating from the man and a faint scent of blood. From those clues alone, he could tell this wasn't your average assassin. He told Taiyan the guy was strong, but believed he could beat him fairly easily. After all, he was at least 3 levels above him. Clearly, humility wasn't a strong suit for this duo. Every villain that appears gets roasted and ignored. Taeyin then asked what Guan was waiting for. It was time to test whether his judgment was correct. "Man, I love how Guan operates." He just steps forward, walking calmly between the bandits, who don't even react. Stylishly, he let his aura flow while keeping his hand near his sword. The enemy leader didn't seem too impressed at first, but then began drawing his sword, acknowledging the impressive energy coming from Guan, but it wouldn't be that easy. In the blink of an eye, Guan almost took a slash. He barely dodged, and the enemy was already coming in for a second attack. Guan quickly drew his blade and blocked it. and the real fight began. Blows were exchanged back and forth. The enemy activated a red aura and was surprised by Guan's skill. He realized Guan wasn't just some bodyguard for a random merchant. The enemy leapt in for a heavy slash, but San yelled out for Guan to be careful and said they should help him. But Taiyan remained calm and said, "This will be over in a single strike." Before she could even ask what he meant, the slash had already landed. Guan had obviously finished off the fool. So Yan was stunned. How had Guan taken down such an advanced enemy with so little effort? As he walked back, Taiyan said Guan had disappointed him again. He only cut off the guy's arm. Clearly, he was still too soft-hearted. The girl looked to the side, thinking, this guy's totally crazy. But she also wanted to know why Guan was suddenly growing stronger out of nowhere. Taiyan ordered her to stop standing around and take care of the rest. He had some questions to ask the remaining enemies, so they shouldn't kill them too brutally. They struck the enemy's meridians and pressure points, knocking them out in twisted positions. But there was one problem. One of them had disappeared. Suddenly, someone shouted for Tan to dodge. When she looked to the side, a blade was already inches from Taiyan's neck. Before she could act, Guan appeared from above and smashed the assassin's head into the ground. But our boy wasn't very happy about it. Because in saving him, Guan had let the other assassin escape with just a missing arm. That damned servant really was too soft. King Guan stood there apologizing, clearly ashamed for letting one of the enemies get away. Tan thought to himself that if he were still the celestial demon, a mistake like that would never be forgiven. However, for some reason, this time he wasn't even that angry. He just said it didn't matter since that guy was ridiculously weak and told them to gather the other three. A short time later, the three captives were lined up. Tiran wanted to know what they were going to do with the incredible trio. He was pretty sure killing them was a great option and wanted to know if anyone disagreed. Obviously, the only ones against that idea were the three men on the ground, begging for their lives. But Taiyan simply replied that since no one was giving up any information, he would just start attacking. That was enough to get them talking. They confessed they were sent by the Crimson Dragon sect. It was an order from the vice leader, and anyone who refused would be beaten. They had no choice. Taiyan thanked them and told them to keep talking. At that moment, Sandan was sent to bring the three along. While they were heading toward the brothel, Xian was confused. Was he really planning on going ahead with his usual nightly visit after everything that had just happened? And then, there we are again, back at the House of the Fallen Flower. The moans, as usual, echoed through every hallway. At the door, both servants were standing, blushing and confused. Poor King Wan, this was basically torture for him. He couldn't even look to the side. San asked if this was really okay and if he was sure they didn't need to go in to check what was happening. He just replied that it was normal and that they just had to endure it until morning. Even San started to find it strange, and that's when she realized the poor guy probably had to go through this every single night. Even the three captives lying on the floor could hear everything. Sometime later, as the sun rose, our boy came out of the room. Strangely enough, the three bandits now looked a bit innocent and awkward. Juan remarked that, oddly, they had given up all the information. Apparently, the Crimson Dragon sect really did plan to lure Tytoon there to solve some internal problem. Not even the three captives knew the identity of the guy who escaped. He only handled special missions for the boss. Taeyong was sure they weren't lying. That guy wasn't some ordinary thug. He had just been unlucky to run into King Wen and was definitely not some regular bodyguard. 99% of people would have died against him. The only thing that still seemed strange was that, for now, the Zangil people didn't appear to be involved in this mess. So Taekyong said they were heading home and to bring the three with them. Later, back at the house, he opened the gate, shoved the three captives in, and said he would place some restrictions on them. He turned to King Wan and Xian, telling them they had better pay attention. He was going to teach them some martial arts, so they needed to learn quickly. Xian was a bit confused. After all, they didn't even know Tiny was capable of teaching anything. But he simply said that they needed to learn this basic restriction technique. The key was how you connected your energy and channeled it through someone else's body. He placed his hand on one of the guys' necks and warned them to be careful. If they did it wrong, the person could die. He also warned the captive to behave or he'd lose his eyesight. The poor guy tried to complain, but it was too late. He was already on the ground, writhing in pain. No one knew exactly what was happening, but the protagonist told them to take advantage of the situation. There were plenty of test subjects around, so they could practice as much as they wanted without worry. Juan started practicing while wondering where Tan had learned these things. Cyan stood behind them, still confused by the strange dynamic between the two. Suddenly, the protagonist's expression changed. He said he was going to teach them how to make a man's testicles explode. This is the same guy, remember, who's supposed to be the celestial demon that wants a peaceful life. A few seconds later, both captives were curled up on the floor in agony. Their balls had actually exploded. That was just cruel. Honestly, it would have been kinder to kill them back in the forest. While all this was happening, we cut to the pavilion of Duke. A man approached a table where a bearded elder sat, reading a scroll and asking if the House of Fragrant Roses was the first place our boy had visited. Apparently, he didn't recognize anything. This man was none other than the uncle of our protagonist, the master of the pavilion of Diok. His name was Biok Wang. The man speaking to him was Boksong, his son, who said they'd soon expose a weakness. His father closed the scroll and said it didn't matter if they were recognized or not, they simply needed to take advantage of this incident and profit as much as possible. That damned perfumed house was actually an intelligence organization disguised as a brothel, and now they had to make sure to bring it into the Golden Wall Merchant Guild, the merchant group that includes the protagonist's entire family. The father asked if his son had anything else to report. Boksong explained that the House of the Crimson Dragon seemed to be splitting apart after the death of one of their leaders. One of the emerging factions was known as the Golden Celestial Alliance, and they had to keep an eye on them because they were extremely dangerous. This alliance had formed. For some merchants in the city of Yuhan, on the surface they coexisted together. However, the truth was that this alliance was actually against their group. Now the father was wondering what these bastards were planning again. The son responded that he would keep an eye on them, and if he noticed anything suspicious, he would report it immediately. After a moment of silence, the elder decided to ask, "What's this business with Tan being called the King of the Night? I want to know if the boy is using any special medicine or what he's consuming to have all this energy." The son replied that he hadn't heard anything about any medicine. He thought the boy was simply in bad health from spending all his energy with the girls at the brothel. It was dangerous how much energy he was putting into that place, considering his current health. He was only shortening his own lifespan. The father said he understood. It was fine, but the truth was, he was dying of envy of that damn kid. Later, back at our protagonist's mansion, Soso asked what had happened to those bandits. She looked around and noticed that they were all obedient and desolate. He replied that they weren't bandits but honest workers he had brought in to help her since she needed it. She responded that they clearly looked a little suspicious. Tyne just thought to himself that if she didn't want help, she shouldn't have asked for it in the first place. The truth was, Soso was starting to believe that her boy was a kind person. He brought in these poor guys who clearly had the look of those desperate to start work. Tyson then said that now they would receive new names. From left to right, it was Black 1, Black 2, and Black 3. The guys were obviously confused, but one of them bowed to the ground in thanks, saying it was incredible to be called Black 1, Black 2, and Black 3. He turned to Soso and said, "It's decided. These are the boys' names now. You can use them however you want." Then he asked if she knew where Kingwan was, as it had been a while since he had seen him. Soso scratched her head and replied that, at this time of day, Kingwan was usually training. Our boy looked up at the sky and muttered, "This guy lives such a stupidly honest life for someone who's just a merchant's bodyguard." I'm not sure if he complimented him or insulted him, but there he was, once again, Kingwan practicing his moves with his blade, the same one that had taken down the guy with a single strike to the jaw. He had never seen an art like that, so how did he do something like that? Kingwan had never regretted joining the Dragon Sword organization. His job with the merchants was simple. Any crisis they faced, he was there to help. As long as he kept it in check, he was paid extremely well. However, it was also true that the longer it took for him to get stronger, the more anxious he became. But lately, a change had occurred. Seeing Tyne from afar, he knew that he was the right person to help him reach a new level. Suddenly, someone interrupted his thoughts, asking how long he was planning on training. When he looked back, he saw our boy standing there. Tate immediately said it was time for the usual visit to the courtesan's house. Kingwan, as always, said he had a question and turned around to ask what it was. Wan just wanted to know if he was still hiding from him. Tan Sang, confused, asked what he was talking about, and Wan said he had started taking notes from the moment Tan dealt with that assassin on the bed, then how he killed the leader of the Crimson Dragon guys, and now these restriction techniques. After all that, he was absolutely certain. The protagonist wondered if this guy really knew who he was. He had thought this idiot was just one of those strong but dumb guys, but it seemed he had let his guard down too much. He couldn't let anyone find out that he was the celestial demon, especially because he wanted to live a peaceful life. Oh yeah, we can see how peaceful your life really is. So peaceful that you're already questioning whether you should kill this guy now, just in case he figured it all out. But suddenly, Wan fell to his knees and begged for help. Tan was a bit confused, but Wan said he already knew that he was a genius and now wanted him to accept him as a disciple. Tain noticed that Wan was thinking of him as some kind of martial arts master hiding his abilities. Then Wan said that he also wanted to become stronger, that he sought revenge because someone had destroyed his sect. Our dear Taedun, the philosopher, told him not to let revenge become the driving force behind his actions. Many people had lost their sects, and he was just one of them. He shouldn't think he was special because of that. Taedun revealed the harsh truth of life and gave Wan a scolding. Then he turned around and said that anyone who used emotional motivations wouldn't last long. That's how these feelings lead to their end, and those people eventually disappear. That's why he would only accept someone who had the pure desire to simply become stronger. Wan, all bent over, listened to it all. Tang continued, saying that whoever chose this path could seek revenge when they were strong enough. The poor guy just joins his hands, lowers his head, and says he understands. A while later, on the bridge on the way to the Kurt San's house, another day for the guys. As usual, Sen was following along, not really liking all this fun. Ahead of her, our boy tells Wan to stop being an idiot and start talking to her. Wan tries to pretend he doesn't know what he's talking about, but our boy just tells him to stop acting stupid because he knows exactly what's going on. Meanwhile, Song wonders if he really does this every day. What does the young master see in a person like this? Suddenly, Taein stops and says the air smells strange, like blood. No one else is smelling anything, but our boy says they're idiots and are just using their noses. Sorry, I don't have the 2.0 version of my sense of smell unlocked yet. Taein immediately realizes it's the same aura as the guy whose arm was cut off, and from the presence he's feeling, it's clearly more than one person. He tells them to go kill someone. Before he finishes his sentence, Wan has already taken off. On the other hand, Sailon hasn't felt any presence, so she doesn't know what to do, but suddenly she notices something approaching and grabs a small knife. It wasn't our boy who grabbed the knife though, and he tells her to stop standing still like an idiot, or she's going to die. She has no idea where the attack is coming from, but he points in the direction and tells her to go there quickly, saying she better do her best. One of the attackers advances and that white-haired guy shows up again, aiming a strike, but this guy's missing an arm. Sane easily defends herself, and the guy immediately realizes she's weaker than Wan. She grits her teeth and charges forward, telling him to stay where he is. However, it looks like she's fallen into a trap he had set. Everything starts exploding beneath her feet. It was likely a trap designed to keep her in place as the guy used the opportunity to head towards our boy. She realizes that from the start he had been trying to create an opening to kill the young master. The way things were going, he was going to be killed right there. It seemed like the guy had really managed to stab Taylene in the chest, but he just smiles and says, "It's moments like this when you realize who's inexperienced." The fool's expression changes when he sees that our boy has grabbed his sword with his armpit. Before he even understands what's going on, he gets a strike to the neck and falls, spitting out blood. Sang can hardly believe it. He beat that guy with a single strike and she hadn't even moved. Once again, he tells her to stop standing there and to start participating in the fight. She apologizes, saying she'll do her best. He then tells her not to forget to bring the fallen fool's body because they're going to make use of it. As she bends down to grab the body, she can't believe Tang really defeated that guy, someone she would have had difficulty with even without moving. Now, she looks at him with different eyes. She's starting to think that maybe she's found someone who's going to change her life. Apparently, the fact that he visits a different girl every day at the brothel doesn't bother her. She's dying to be by his side and understand the technique he used. Later, under the moonlight, she receives another scolding. He tells her that based on her performance today, she's too weak to think about protecting him. From now on, she would train with Kingwon. She hesitates a bit, but in a way it would be like learning from our boy since he wanted her to become stronger. Perhaps she could become his disciple in the future. But then, she changes her expression and asks, "Where's Kingwon?" He tells her not to worry, that Kingwon can take care of himself, but if she wanted, she could go get him. Obviously, he had already defeated another bandit with ease, or maybe not so easily, since Kingwon was left panting, saying that this damn opponent was tougher than he had expected. Still, he managed to defeat him with some difficulty. Kingwon stops for a second, looking like an idiot, trying to sense everything around him, but he doesn't feel any human presence. So, where are the two people he came with? The next day at the pavilion, there are more discussions about Taiyang going to the courtesan's house, taking a few corpses with him. This goes against the elder's plans because he wanted to absorb those guys without making things more complicated. However, with Taiyang doing this, there isn't much they can do. The person passing on the information also mentions that the master of the Crimson Dragon House said Taiyang has no choice but to hunt him down. The elder sighs and says that unfortunately they won't be able to let this incident slide. Something needs to be resolved. There are too many eyes on this person, and at this rate things would start affecting the reputation of the Golden Wall Merchant Group. He moves closer to the window and says it looks like Taiyang has been recovering his health. His son remarks that it's hard to believe. It seems that every night Taiyang spends all his vitality but still manages to be 100%. Was he consuming some kind of elixir? The elder simply replies that maybe one day they'll discover this legendary secret. Back at home, the meal had been set on the table, and look, Black 1, Black 2, and Black 3 were there with them. The guys were clearly being treated well. The protagonist asks why they aren't eating and they seem hesitant. It's kind of disrespectful to eat with the master. However, he simply says they're part of his group now, so they should start eating. From now on, they would join every meal together. Black 1, 2, and 3 immediately respond that this is actually a great idea. Then someone comments that the man known as the Divine Doctor would be arriving today. Rumors said he could heal any body, even one without any vitality. Our boy responds that he'll keep recovering just fine if he can go to the courtesan's house every night. Everyone gets a little awkward. They can't believe he says that in front of everyone. Strangely, Sue almost seems to understand what's going on. She says there's no way he's going to recover like that. It's not like he's stealing their energy. But he replies that in a way you could say what he's doing there is very similar. She wants an explanation, but he just tells her to be ready when the doctor arrives. She shares that he seems to have gotten separate accommodations in the city, and from what she heard, he wants to check out the area he's in before coming up. On top of the mountain, a man wearing a hat watches the city and says that the name Golden Wall Merchants sounds very grand. Then another man shows up. One of those pretty boys. Whenever there's already a malicious protagonist and then a handsome guy shows up, there are only two possibilities. Either he dies or turns into a villain and gets wrecked, or he becomes that goofy friend who gets humiliated all the time. That's always how it goes. Who wants to bet with me? Back to the little meal that was happening before. Our protagonist is eating peacefully, then comments that he's heard people saying Black One has been helping out a lot lately. The poor guy, all crooked, smiles and says it's nothing. He was just watching over the storage areas and lending a hand. Then Save adds that Black 2 and 3 are actually the most hard-working ones of all. He also notes that lately the young master has been looking more and more handsome. He insists he's not lying or just trying to flatter. He's really noticed that the master seems taller, stronger, with smoother skin. Even though he's a man, he feels more and more infatuated each day. Our boy tells him to shut up and stop saying such disgusting things, but Black 1 keeps praising him, saying the young master's growth is truly incredible. Black 2 and 3, on the other hand, are thinking this crazy guy should really keep quiet. The protagonist, however, knows that in a way this guy is actually noticing something real. He's not as pale as before and has been regaining his muscles, probably because he hasn't stopped absorbing the courtesans. Whatever the outcome, the only thing he knows is that he can't stop collecting souls. If he keeps doing this someday, what? Will he live a peaceful life like the title of this story suggests? Definitely not. Sometime later, we see a crowd gathered at the entrance. They've arrived with the so-called Divine Doctor. A man in a green cloak greets him, saying it's an honor to meet him. That's Minjan, the chief of the staff at the Golden Gate Mansion, the merchant group led by our protagonist. The divine doctor replies that it's simply the work of fate. He's excited to meet the patient and asks them to bring him. Like us, the people around are thinking this guy looks way too young to actually be the divine doctor. As he walks through the mansion, the doctor comments that the place is truly impressive. The mute Medino explains that the owner of the Golden Gate Group spent a lot of money building it. It's one of the 3 largest pavilions in the entire nearby region. Meanwhile, Black 1, 2, and 3, though we're still not sure exactly who is who, are working in the garden. The doctor glances to the side and asks, "Who is that woman?" "Huh, did you fall in love, naughty boy?" He's told she is the second servant of the young master of the mansion. She apparently came from a very famous courtesan house in the province and asked to serve the boy. The doctor looks around again and asks if the other women went through something similar. He's told yes, they're also women from the courtesan house who came asked to work for him after he visited them. This doctor is getting more peculiar. He says each of them has an extremely rare body constitution and that he wants them for himself. Medino thinks to himself that he never imagined the divine doctor would be such a womanizer. A bit awkward, he replies that he kind of understands what he means. After all, they are all beautiful. But the doctor quickly corrects him, saying he's referring to their pure physical constitution. He wasn't talking about their outer appearance at all. Most likely he's talking about their internal traits or special bodies. Here's the translated and corrected version of the paragraph in English, with proper punctuation and grammar. Modinho apologizes for having misunderstood, and the doctor says it's all right, he just wants to know if he can take all the girls as his disciples. Modinho starts trembling for a second because of course they all belong to the young master. The doctor says that if the young master agrees, it would be a favor he'd never forget. With a mischievous smile, he insists that no matter how amazing the girls are, only a fool would refuse to form a connection with him. Well, as I said earlier, he's probably going to act like a little villain and get beaten up by our boy. The guy is full of confidence, convinced the protagonist will accept. However, face to face with our main character, he immediately rejects the offer. The doctor asks him to think a bit more, saying it would also be a great opportunity for the girls. But Tyson asks, why would someone who already has 10 disciples want 4 more? Clearly, this man is greedy. He also says that the doctor seems to appreciate them for more than just teaching. The doctor awkwardly sweats and says that the people who came with him aren't necessarily disciples, they're just helpers. But Taysan replies that it didn't seem that way given how those old men clung to him. Either they were disciples or they were subordinates. Besides that, our boy is sure the man in front of him is a lot older than he looks. Now it makes sense. The scumbag is hiding his age. After pausing for a second, the doctor says that learning his techniques isn't a chance that comes easily. But Tyson just wants to know what would the girls actually gain from learning these techniques. He slams his teacup on the table and says the real issue is that the doctor wants something that belongs to him. Moreover, he knows full well that the man doesn't actually want to teach medical skills. What he really wants is the rare materials their bodies can provide. Embarrassed, the doctor says it's impossible to use humans as materials, but inside he's thinking that the boy crossed the line by accusing him like that. He sees the protagonist as having weak energy and a bad body. Maybe it'd be best to just kill him now. And if he claimed the boy died in the middle of treatment, probably no one would care. However, something starts moving in his direction, and something hits him square in the forehead. Yikes. His hat gets sliced, and Tyson asks if by any chance he looks like an easy target. He warns that the doctor's understanding of martial arts is so minimal, it's not even enough to think about countering him. At this point, the doctor is only useful because of what he knows about medicine. Probably, the best option would be to kill him right here. What? Our boy sliced the man's hat just by flicking a bit of tea. All right then. The doctor is trembling, unable to understand this intense bloodlust. It's as if someone is screaming inside his head. He's losing control. Taizan then says it's starting to bother him. These are people who work for him, and it's going to be really annoying if people like this keep showing up trying to take them away. After all he wants is to live a peaceful life. Sure, the doctor stands there like the rest of us, with a dumbfounded expression, thinking this bastard doesn't want anything peaceful in his life. But that feeling of fear, he'd felt it once before. Then, our boy says he actually needed someone to deal with a few minor problems. Boom, I was right twice. I said the guy would first be a villain and second, that he'd become an ally, and it looks like that's exactly what's happening. Soon Min asks if he really intends to work here now. The doctor quickly says yes. His greatest wish in life is to work for Master Taisan. Of course, Medino agrees instantly. It's an unexpected decision, but a brilliant one. He swears on the name of the Golden Wall merchants that they won't regret allowing him to stay. The doctor thanks them, but of course, the followers who came with him are all confused. They don't understand why he suddenly changed his attitude. The doctor reflects that he lived a free life for a long time, but in the end got stuck in a place like this. Treating Tyson might take 1 or 2 months, but killing him wouldn't be easy. After that wave of bloodlust he felt, at least he's relieved he didn't wet his pants. Then, Wangguan asks our boy if he's sure this is a good idea. He had placed restrictions on all the doctors, but the main one hadn't wanted to accept them. Taeson replies not to worry. He had already placed the restriction on that doctor himself. That's why he won't be able to do anything. Wangguan then asks why he didn't just put the restriction on all of them. And our boy gives the obvious answer. He's still very sick and doesn't have enough energy to spend on things like that. Besides, it's important to understand, those guys aren't normal doctors. Suddenly, the doctor appears right beside them and says that his new job is to take care of Master Taeson's health at all times. So obviously, he'll be sticking close. Out of nowhere, Song wants to ask the honest question. The doctor, well, she wants to know if it's really okay for someone this sick to be visiting the courtesan's house every single day and night. Not only that, he didn't just visit at night, he stayed the whole night until sunrise. The doctor was shocked. Not even he expected the boy to be staying out all night. A real prodigy. He then asks to check Taesan's pulse. Taesan agrees, but warns him to be quick. Now look at this sly doctor. He says he wants to heal, but in reality he wants to analyze Taesan's condition to find weaknesses and see if there's a way to kill him. However, the moment he touches him, he clearly feels something is off. It was a constitution that didn't make any sense. He even asks if the boy is really a living person. The expressions of the two subordinates change immediately, and Taesan asks why he would question something like that just from checking a pulse. The doctor explains that he's never seen anyone with a body constitution as bad as his. The flow of energy in him was so poor that it was basically the same as a dead person. Taesan asks what he does with someone who calls him a ghost like that. Strangely, Kim-won suggests they explode the guy's balls, but what kind of logic is that? The doctor, however, tells them not to misunderstand. All he's trying to say is that the boy needs immediate treatment, but Taesan asks if the doctor would be willing to bet his life on what he's saying. The doctor replies, of course not. No way he'd bet his life on it. He smiles and admits that he has no idea how to treat something like this, but that's his job, which confuses everyone. What's with all that confidence if he doesn't even know what to do? Still, he assures our boy that at the very least his reading of the body wasn't wrong, but Taesan just tells him to get lost. If he's not willing to bet his life and doesn't even know how to treat him, then what's the point? The doctor responds that he can't just leave now. His mission is to follow and understand what's going on. Inside, though, he's thinking how strange all of this is. How could someone even move around with a body like that? Then he asks our boy how he even heard of him, the divine doctor. Taesan answers that he has no idea who he is. In fact, the doctor thinks he's joking and asks if Taesan is a member of a cult or a secret family among the merchants. Suddenly, Taesan stops walking, turns around, and says he has no idea what cult he's talking about. But from the sound of it, it's not very secret, since the doctor has the guts to say its name out loud. With that, he walks away and warns the doctor that if he keeps talking so much, he won't last very long. Once again, the fool is left stunned.